It all started with my arrogant sisters demanding that I rent out my vacation house for profit. Naturally, I said no. And in a move that shocked no one, their husbands decided to break in. Now, they're facing charges. This story was uploaded to my channel months ago, but new updates have come to light that might catch your interest. I'll leave the timestamp in the description, so you can skip the older parts. But for now, let me take you back to the chaos. It happened today. My parents, in their infinite wisdom, decided to host a barbecue. I guess that's what older people do to stay entertained. I really didn't want to go. Who would, right? I can't stand my sisters, their husbands, or their kids. My wife and I don't have children, so we're in a different world than they are. But of course, my mom pressured us to go, and long story short, we found ourselves there. When we arrived, about 20 people were already there, the smell of grilled food thick in the air, the sounds of laughter mixed with the clinking of bottles. My sisters and their husbands were already well past tipsy, swaying a little too much as they tried to maintain some semblance of composure. Meanwhile, my mom was too busy wrangling her gaggle of nieces and nephews, all of them between 7 and 11 years old, a cacophony of shrill voices as she desperately tried to impose some order on their chaos. My dad? He was relaxing in the whirlpool part of the pool, cooler in hand, beers floating beside him like a well-earned island of peace. My wife and I did the polite thing, made small talk, ate some food, and had a frozen margarita. Yet, my sisters and their husbands didn't waste any time criticizing us for being late, for not wearing swimsuits, for allegedly ruining the vibe they had going. You know the type, right? It was just another typical suburban summer gathering, filled with judgment and empty chatter. Then the children, my nieces and nephews, decided it was time for some entertainment. Two of them sprinted up to a neighboring guest who was enjoying the poolside, and without warning, shoved her in. She only got halfway soaked, managing to stumble in without fully falling in. She didn't raise a fuss, though her face clearly showed she wasn't pleased. Instead, she calmly took her towel, patted herself dry, and walked away. No drama. No complaints. But of course, my sisters and their husbands found it hilarious. Laughing loudly, they cheered on their little ones as if it were some great victory. I was standing just a few steps away from the water when my instincts kicked in. From the corner of my eye, I saw 3 of them, the little troublemakers, sprinting right towards me. Oh great, I thought. I was their next target. I wasn't about to be pushed into that pool. I quickly sidestepped and outsmarted them. But of course, they had a different plan. All 3 of them barreled straight into the pool instead. The crowd watching burst out laughing, my wife included, but the mood quickly shifted when 2 of the kids, dressed in swimwear but unable to swim, floundered in the water. Their drunken mothers, who had been so carefree moments before, now panicked. I stepped back, allowing others to rush to the children's aid. After all, I wasn't in swimwear, and I wasn't about to dive in either. The children cried as though they had been through some terrible ordeal, wailing like they'd lost something monumental. The situation quickly turned into pure chaos. The 4 intoxicated parents, my sisters and their husbands, started screaming at me and anyone else nearby for nearly letting their kids drown. They were furious, blaming me, as though I had somehow pushed their children in. And that wasn't all. In their infinite wisdom, 2 of the kids had been recording their antics on their parents' iPhones, which, of course, had now been dumped in the pool. My brother-in-law, not to be outdone, decided he would be the one to retrieve them. But, with his blood alcohol level high enough to be a concern, he failed spectacularly. He plunged right into the pool and, predictably, face-planted in the shallow end. Of course, no one else was stepping in to help. My sisters continued yelling, my brother-in-law still barking orders despite his own clumsy efforts. I had had enough. I told them bluntly, it was their responsibility to watch their kids, not mine. If something had happened, they'd have to answer for it, not me. Heated words were exchanged, nothing too pleasant, before the second brother-in-law fell again, letting out a string of curses. At that point, my wife and I decided it was time to leave. But as we walked away, the blame was already shifting. They were claiming that I had somehow allowed the kids to throw me into the pool and ruin my phone for fun. Meanwhile, my dad, who had been blissfully watching from the side, was swept into the storm too, his calm demeanor caught in the chaos. I wasn't surprised by their behavior. I understand that kids have fun, but their actions were a direct reflection of their parents' lack of responsibility. I regretted attending the gathering. It wasn't worth it. Sure, it was nice to see my parents and their neighbors, but being around my sisters and their husbands was draining. There's this constant undercurrent of jealousy and petty behavior. It's exhausting. Let me explain. My relationship with my sisters has always been strained. We're like oil and water, never really mixing. They're 8 and 10 years older than me, and we've never been close. It's not like we have much in common either. They're stay-at-home moms, and their husbands earn good money. In fact, one of them makes significantly more than I do. My wife and I, on the other hand, both have professional careers. We don't have kids, which allows us more financial freedom. We take trips when we want, and we've made smart investments. That's where the envy starts. My sisters and their husbands can't seem to understand how we've been able to live a different lifestyle. It's not that we're flaunting it, it's just that our lives have taken a different course. This subtle tension between us has always been there, and it's led to a lot of petty behavior from their side. That's why I wanted to avoid the get-together, but my wife, being the optimistic person she is, was willing to give it a shot. Hopefully, next time, she won't feel pressured to go. She's much more forgiving than I am, but after our drive home, I could tell even she had had enough. "Your dad sounds awesome," someone remarked. And yes, my dad is incredible. He's laid back and loves to entertain. Having worked in sales for years, he enjoys being around people and seeing them have a good time. He's really enjoying his retirement, and that day, he and 2 friends simply sat back and watched the madness unfold. My mom's great too, but this situation upset her. The kids, despite their drama, were fine by the time I left. They were inside, watching TV, 7 of them, ages ranging from 7 to 11. The 2 10-year-olds and the 9-year-old were the ones who tried to push me into the pool, and I suspect the 11-year-old, the usual ringleader, encouraged them. My parents, yeah, they're not naive. They're pretty relaxed, believe in letting people live their own lives. But the thing is, I think they'll soften their stance eventually. But it's their call, not mine. For now, though, we're still staying away from any family events for a while. The real struggle is with my sisters. They're probably stressing, thinking I'm going to block them from using the cabin. But that's not on me. It's my parents' decision, not mine. They'll figure it out. One thing's for sure, the whole idea of my sisters building a cluster of homes on the land once we inherit it, well, that's not going to happen. I've known about it for ages, just never paid attention to it. The plots up there typically only allow 1 building, but the piece of land my parents own? It's different. Way bigger. It's at the end of a road, and there's enough space for at least 3 houses, each with incredible views. Here's the thing, my sisters, they don't truly feel sorry. They're just after something. And honestly, their apologies? They don't feel real to me. They don't seem genuine, and I'm not about to associate with them anytime soon. As far as the vacation house goes, that's up to my parents. Sure, I technically own it. I take care of the expenses. But the house? I bought it for them. Gave them the power to manage it day to day. They're good people, always dreamed of having a family retreat, but they could never afford it. I bought it because I've been lucky financially. I've saved, invested, and received a big bonus the year I sold my house and moved in with my wife. Honestly, I don't mind if my parents let my sisters use the house. But I've got to admit, I'm finding it a bit funny how uneasy my sister's getting, knowing I can afford to buy the place, let them use it, and never say a word about it. Dad changed the lock code last week, so now only he, Mom, my wife, and I know it. And when it comes to Mom babysitting the kids, She told me she and occasionally Dad visit each sister's house once a week to spend the day with the kids. When school starts, she's going to pick each group of kids up once a week on different days and spend the evening with them. Handling all 5 kids at once is a lot, she says, but one group at a time? That's manageable. Here's where things get interesting. Both Mom and Dad have told me they don't plan on inviting my sisters and their families over to their house anytime soon. They're enjoying the peace. I think they were already fed up with the old dynamics and the pool party incident. That was the perfect opportunity to change things up. And then there's the weird part. I just read a post from the moderators on the other subreddit, talking about property damage caused by some kind of violence. What's puzzling is I still can't quite figure out what happened. I guess it was the phones getting destroyed, maybe? Fast forward to August 26, 2023, 9 days after my last update. It's been an interesting week, to say the least. I thought things had already spiraled out of control, but there's more. I need to share some financial background so this next part makes sense. My parents? They've never been good with saving money. I've been handling their taxes for years, so I know their financial situation pretty well. Their house is paid off, but they've got little saved for retirement. They receive Social Security, Dad's got a decent pension, and they've got some savings, but there's no hidden fortune. I bought them a car, a retirement gift, so they'd have a nice ride. It was the first car they've owned in 20 years, since they've usually leased cars. But my sisters? They think our parents are wealthy and that they'll inherit everything. They figure I don't need the money, so they've never bothered to save either. Turns out, my older sister and her husband, who have 3 kids, have been living way beyond their means for a while. They're in debt, maxed out credit cards, behind on car leases. One car's about to be repossessed. He used to boast about his income, but it turns out he was only earning about half of what he claimed. On Tuesday, my sister told Mom all this. They need a loan. But there was a shocking twist. She admitted she'd been renting out the vacation house once a month for the past 3 years. And keeping the money. Over $22,000 for a weekend, at least $4,000 for a week. Now, with the house off limits to them, she's had to cancel one group of renters. She's worried they'll lose everything. My parents can't help financially. My other sister knew about the rental situation but didn't mention it. In fact, I think she's done the same thing. I once found a family at the vacation house who claimed they were staying there with my sister and her family while they were supposedly out of town. I didn't make a scene. Just assumed she let some friends stay there. But I've always wondered about it. I learned all of this from my parents, who are seriously stressed out about it, especially Mom. Dad's mostly angry. He feels let down. I can tell he's embarrassed that he can't help his daughter out financially. He made it clear, as long as he's in charge, my sisters won't be using the vacation house anytime soon. And here's where it gets real. My parents reached out to me because they thought my sisters would try to talk to me next. And they were right. Thursday came, and my sister showed up at our door. This time, it was with her husband and kids, hanging around outside, waiting for me to come home. I had a choice. I could either walk into a public argument, risking a scene, or invite them in. I chose to invite them in. My older sister spun a story, and my younger sister agreed. They said it was crucial for them to regain access to the cabin. They accused me of being a terrible brother, and insisted I should pay for their kids' college education because that's what family does. I let them present their side, then I confronted them with the information my parents had shared. Things escalated quickly. Denials, tears, yelling. It got intense. Even 2 days later, I can still hear the phantom ringing in my ears. I won't sugarcoat it, I said some pretty harsh things. But nothing I said was untrue. After about an hour of this, they left. After they left, I took a shower and lay down. When I woke up, my wife was home. Her first words? She'd had to block even more numbers, because my sisters had started calling us from new ones. My parents sent me a message yesterday asking me to call them. I'm sure my sisters have already told them their version of the story, but I don't have the energy to go through it all again just yet. I'm usually pretty lively, but this whole drama has left me drained. The stakes had shifted. What once was my domain, something I thought was entirely under my control, had now become a battleground. It was never supposed to be this way. I had always felt that this property, despite being legally mine, should remain at my parents' discretion. But now, the tables had turned. My parents needed me to grant them access to the house, and it felt like everything I had carefully arranged was suddenly unraveling. In my attempt to regain control, I made sure to fortify the place. I locked the gate with a chain that seemed impenetrable, one that could hold the weight of any challenge. Alongside this, I reset all the keypads, generating new codes just yesterday. For a while, I took solace in these actions, thinking they would restore some peace. The addition of security cameras, a new layer of protection, filled me with a sense of calm. It was thrilling in a way to see the installer talk me into positioning one that overlooked the entire valley. Although the cost of the system exceeded what I had expected, the sense of safety it provided felt priceless. He even recommended placing signs to let everyone know the property was under surveillance. A visible warning, he said, was essential. To protect every corner, I also locked the water shut-off valve, a small but crucial detail in the grand scheme. But there was a catch: the keys were mine and mine alone. If I lost them, it would be a nightmare. Yet, the water lock was a secret between my wife and me. Nobody else could access it, and I intended to keep it that way. Then, the calls came. Each of my brothers-in-law reached out, one after the other. The first, the older of the two, was frantic. He'd brought some friends for a getaway, only to find himself locked out. The gate, a simple barrier, had become his prison. His anger was palpable. I could hear it through the phone, feel his humiliation. He swung wildly between asserting his right to access and playing the victim. At one point, he even threatened to tear down the gate, to rip it from its very foundations. His voice grew increasingly desperate as he admitted that they had been leasing the house to friends, claiming they needed the extra income. The absurdity of his accusations, saying I was sabotaging their business, left me speechless. His demands? Ridiculous. He even asked me to reimburse his guests. What was I hearing? A part of me regretted not recording the conversation. But then, I wasn't even sure how to do that on my office phone. The other brother-in-law, more subdued, seemed to be calling on my sister's behalf. He didn't resist when I made it clear, again, that they were no longer welcome to use the house. The words had been said. And they were final. I told them all that the house was off limits, and that should have been the end of it. But even then, doubts began to creep in. My thoughts turned to selling. The house, this vacation property, had no real place in my life. My wife and I barely used it, and there was little hope of hosting family gatherings there anytime soon. When I broached the idea with my parents, they had a surprising reaction. Their response was passive. They didn't push back. They were indifferent, or so it seemed. They didn't mind if I sold. Their only concern was that it would be a hefty profit, a notion I found strangely comforting. The house sat on 3 lots, each with panoramic views, hidden away at the end of a private road. But emotionally, I wasn't ready to make the leap. I knew that selling now would be driven by emotion, not logic. My sisters and I weren't speaking, and I had no intention of reaching out to them. As for their relationship with my parents, I had no interest in knowing, and I preferred it that way. On a brighter note, we managed a rare family outing. Last week, my parents, my wife, and I had a dinner together at a new restaurant. It was pleasant, thankfully free from the weight of the ongoing drama. Mom shared updates on the kids, her visits to her nieces and nephews. It was the small, simple moments that gave me some relief. Yet, I couldn't shake the tension gnawing at me. This chapter was far from over. A month later, October 16th, 2023, things were about to take another turn. I'd received enough requests for an update, and it was time to provide one. I had hired a worker to keep an eye on the vacation home. He was the kind of guy you'd want for this job. He took care of his parents' properties and maintained a few others in the area. He was familiar with the region, and the best part? He was paid to live out what many would call the dream, driving around in his car, walking through the houses, and lounging on decks as if it were all just part of his day job. He checked on the house regularly, sometimes sending me photos of wildlife or sunsets. He even had access to my security cameras, a useful arrangement that allowed him to keep the property secure. Despite his laid-back duties, he also had a serious responsibility. He monitored a camera at the start of a private road, capturing images of every vehicle that passed by. It was an added layer of protection, a safeguard I had set in place. And on top of all this, he was also performing maintenance work, billing me an hourly fee of $450 per month. I admit, his job seemed like it had its perks. He had a routine, one that brought him peace of mind. As he shared with me at dinner, it had given him a sense of security he had never expected. But nothing was ever simple, was it? Thanksgiving had become a point of contention. My sisters were putting pressure on my parents, urging them to get me to host the holiday at the vacation home. It was tradition, after all. My wife and I only made it up every 6 years. The pressure mounted as my dad anticipated my refusal. So, they devised a plan, a brilliant one, in my eyes. They would rent an Airbnb in the mountains for Thanksgiving, and everyone would chip in. If the money didn't come through, one of the sisters could host at her house, or maybe my parents would host there. But as with everything, the plan unraveled. The middle sister was all in for the Airbnb, but the eldest had no money to contribute. Tensions flared. A fight broke out between the sisters, and by the time the window to book the Airbnb closed, Thanksgiving would be spent at my parents' house. My wife and we were sitting this one out. My parents, however, had a different request. Please, don't sell the property. They understood that while they might want to use it occasionally, it wasn't the time for drastic changes. They acknowledged that things were different now and that the family reunions I once hoped for weren't on the horizon. The future? It seemed uncertain. Yet, they clung to the hope that things could one day return to normal. I wasn't convinced, and selling the house still felt like the best option. But, if my parents used it occasionally, I could live with that. It was the emotional weight of it all, the idea of holding onto a piece of our past, that made the decision harder. Still, I had the property's long-term value in mind. If I kept it, it would likely appreciate over time. As the weeks went by, the calls kept coming. My sisters had started reaching out again, this time, from new numbers, thanks to Google Voice. They left messages, urging me to meet and discuss the future of the family vacation house. They even contacted my wife. Thankfully, I had learned the importance of ignoring numbers I didn't recognize. Whatever they were up to, I wasn't interested in playing their game. It was clear, my parents had informed me of the eldest sister's situation. She was selling her jet skis and getting rid of her expensive truck and SUV. The very idea of downscaling was a blow to her ego. For her husband, the truck was everything. But that was never something we had in common. It was part of the reason I never connected with him. To be honest, I didn't care about their struggles. The notion of turning the vacation house into an Airbnb had been floated several times. While I knew it would be lucrative, it wasn't something I was ready to pursue. My parents would be stressed, and the family dynamics were already fragile. The personal items in the house? A logistical nightmare to remove and store. Even with a property manager in place, the hassle would be overwhelming. In the end, it didn't feel worth it. November 27th, 2023. A month and a half after the last update, the situation had escalated. What had started as a family drama had now become something far worse. My brothers-in-law, in a reckless attempt to gain access to the vacation house, had broken in. They were now facing serious charges, breaking and entering, property damage, and threats. The accusations were clear, and I wouldn't back down. If I were compensated for the harm they caused, perhaps I could move on. But as of Saturday night, they were still in custody. I didn't expect them to stay there for long, but I hoped they would. As for me, I had been waiting for this to end, but the tension remained. My sisters hadn't contacted me in over 6 weeks. My parents had enjoyed a visit to the house, and the property manager, Mike, had continued to maintain it. Repairs were being made, and I even got the occasional photo of wildlife or a beautiful sunset. Yet, despite these small comforts, the storm was far from over. The grinding sound of an angle grinder echoed through the property as the intruders attempted to break through the chain. With every turn of the wheel, sparks flew, but the lock held firm. Frustrated, they gouged the door in their effort to force it open. The chaos continued as they finally breached the interior door, gaining access through the utility floor door. But then, unbelievably, they broke into the barn too. Why? Was there a plan behind their madness? Mike and the sheriff's deputies, who had been monitoring the property, were waiting. When they saw movement, Mike was already receiving notifications from the camera system. The reality of what was unfolding hit him hard, and without hesitation, he dialed the sheriff's office. By the time the deputies arrived, the brothers-in-law, still trying to talk their way out of the situation, were caught. Their pleas, however, fell on deaf ears. Breaking into an empty house wasn't a mere misunderstanding, it was a serious crime. Mike knew the drill. People like this were usually desperate meth addicts, ransacking places to fuel their addiction. When the deputies arrested them, the brothers-in-law flipped, threatening to beat Mike up. Not the wisest decision, especially with officers standing nearby. As the situation unfolded, Mike, with the sheriff's deputies, attempted to reach me. But I was miles away, enjoying a peaceful day with my wife and her parents, my phone left in the car. The deputies kept calling, trying to figure out how I wanted to proceed, but I couldn't even hear them. The brothers-in-law, now arrested, had no way out, except for the hope that their wives might help. They freaked out, calling their wives from jail, desperate for assistance. Of course, the wives were equally frantic, reaching out to my parents. They tried calling me too, but I blocked their numbers. Unwilling to accept their fate, they searched for a lawyer to help arrange bail. But it was a holiday weekend in a rural area, so that was no easy task. The older sister had no money left, and her credit cards were maxed out. So, if bail was set, my middle sister would be left to pay for both her husbands. I can only imagine the frustration. By Saturday afternoon, the brothers-in-law were still behind bars. My wife and I checked our phones after we returned from my in-laws. My parents, Mike, and the sheriff's office had flooded my inbox. Their barrage of texts and calls tainted what had been a perfect day. At first, I felt happy, blissfully ignorant. But the moment I glanced at my phone, everything changed. As I sifted through the texts and played the voicemails, my wife read them aloud, revealing the horrifying truth. I knew, with a sinking feeling, what had happened. By the time we got home, I tried to calm myself. But my anger boiled over as I called Mike and heard more about the damage. The realization of how far this had gone, the destruction they had caused, left me fuming. By the end of the night, I called the sheriff's office, making my intentions clear. I wouldn't back down. The brothers-in-law had no right to be on my property, and I would press charges to make that known. Sleep was elusive that night. My mind raced, replaying every moment, every detail. I didn't even bother calling my parents back that night. I couldn't. Not until Saturday afternoon, anyway. I knew I had to speak to them, but I didn't know what to say. My mom was the most shaken by the whole ordeal. My sisters had put pressure on my parents, urging them to convince me to drop the charges. They wanted me to tell the police it was all a mistake, but I was resolute. I wouldn't back down, not until I had spoken to a lawyer and received full reimbursement for all the repairs. By the time we hung up, my mom was in tears, and that tore me apart. My dad, ever the peacemaker, suggested we might want to consider a full makeover of the place to help ease the tension. But I wasn't ready to forgive them, not yet. My frustration simmered, and I avoided going up to the property. The damage was already too much, and I wasn't prepared to confront it in person just yet. Work wasn't allowing me time off for this, non-emergency matters were never given priority, but I planned to visit either the next day or Wednesday. Meanwhile, I sought advice from a couple of friends who were attorneys. I was considering a lawsuit, possibly even getting a restraining order against them. They had caused damage. They had no business being on my property. They needed to pay. Mike, the caretaker, had his own fascinating backstory. Everyone assumed he was just another local guy, but there was more to him than that. Years ago, while on duty as a police officer in a large city, he had been shot. The experience left him with PTSD, so he moved to his parents' retirement home for a quieter life. His bond with the deputies ran deeper than just local camaraderie. Law enforcement had a way of sticking together, especially when they all faced challenges. For me, this was just the beginning. The brothers-in-law had crossed a line. I was done playing nice. I wasn't going to sweep this under the rug. There were consequences, real consequences, and I intended to make sure they understood just how severe those would be. One of the most shocking things came when I learned that my middle brother-in-law had a security clearance. The gravity of the situation hit me then. His career might be at stake. But his older brother, the one who'd been a part of this mess, probably wouldn't face the same consequences. That's why I felt the middle brother-in-law might step up to make amends, to pay for the damages. Mike had a dog, a licensed service animal, that accompanied him everywhere, a reminder of the trauma he'd endured and the strength he carried. But even Mike's personal history didn't compare to the personal vendettas I was feeling now, when trust was broken, the shocking cost of family greed and betrayal.